Hello everybody, Chris here, and in this video I want to show you guys the new color warper tools inside of DaVinci Resolve 17. So you can find these tools on the color page for changing the color of your video, depending on which areas you're trying to target. So it's very similar to the color curves, which allow you to control the color of part of your video based on the original hue of the video clip, or saturation, or luminance. But instead of working on a line and left clicking to add points, which we can adjust in either direction up or down, instead what we're working with is more of a 2D mesh. So one of the main differences is that if you left click and move one of the points, it's also going to affect nearby points. So for the web warp tool, you can see here that we're pitting hue against saturation. So the less saturated points are closer to the center, the more saturated points are out on the edges. And you can obviously tell that each of these points represent a different color on the wheel. So you have yellows over here, greens bottom left, purples top right, and so on. So you can select one point with the left click, or multiple points by left clicking on your first point and then holding control down as you click to second and third points. And then you can left click and drag those points around, as they will also affect the nearby points. So in a sense, this could be compared to stretching or warping the vertices on a mesh in a 3D program like Blender or Maya. But instead, each of these points of vertices represent different colors inside of our video. So we have the hue saturation web. There's also a Chroma versus Luminance grid. You can see that there's two grids here actually. So with the first grid on the left, we have yellows on the left, blues on the right, and the second grid, we have greens on the left, reds on the right, and then as you go down towards the bottom, you have darker variations of the color. So at the bottom here, you would be closest to your dark colors such as a pure black. So one of the things you might notice moving points around here is that any of the points which are white with a thick black outline can't be moved unless you have them selected manually. So these are called pins, and you can move them by selecting them and dragging them around, but if you try to move a nearby point, it's not going to affect those pins. So whenever a point is pinned, it's going to stay in place unless it's selected. Any point that you manually move also becomes a pin automatically. So if I drag this middle purple point over to the right, you'll notice that as soon as I select another point, that this is now pinned into place. So if I grab one of these other nearby points, it's not going to affect that pinned point. So if you want to be sure that a specific point is going to have its color adjusted in a certain way, then leaving it as a pin is good. But instead, if you want these in-between points to be adjusted proportionally to the outer pin points, which are there by default, then you might want to leave them as a pin instead. So you can use this pin depin tool over here to reset a pin, which is going to put it back to being dependent on the locations of the other pins. If I wanted to increase the saturation of all the in-between purple points over here, I can drag this pin out, and then you would see all of the purples become more saturated inside of this. You might also notice while I'm hovering over our video clip that there is a qualifier tool for selecting colors off the screen, and this can be one way of selecting pins. So if I want to make sure that I'm targeting, for instance, this girl's green shirt over here, then I can use the qualifier tool, which is going to select the pin down here, and then I can color shift that towards where I want it to be. So dragging the point over here is going to make these darker greens look a lot more blue, for instance. If I want to make sure that I'm affecting all of these greenish blue colors, then I can select the outer point as well. So you can hit Control Z to undo the selection of this point and the pinning of that point, and then grab this outer point and bring that in towards blue, which in most cases I think would be more like what you're looking for. If on the other hand I was to grab this center pin, then this would be affecting the most desaturated colors the most by basically taking the areas that have no color and then assigning a certain color to them by moving it around in the web. So if I wanted the desaturated colors to look green, I can bring it down here and everything would turn a lot more green inside of our clip. So let's talk more about the tools specifically. So in the bottom left, you have hue resolution and saturation resolution. So if we look around our web, we can see that there are 6 strands coming out. So that is what it's referring to over here when we say the hue resolution. So 6 for 6. And if we change this to 8, then we would have 8 strands going around. The saturation refers to the number of points along each of those strands. You can see that by default they're actually linked, so we can uncheck the link if we want to put this back to 6, or we want to increase it higher than the 8 for the hue, or set it to 12 if we want to increase the number of points to be more than the number of strands that go around our web. So by increasing the resolution on each of these, you have more points to adjust, which can give you more control over your clip. But of course, having more points is going to also increase the complexity of your color adjustments. Inside of the tools box, we have the standard select tool. So that is where you click on a point manually. You can hold Control to select multiple points, basically adding or removing one point at a time to your selection. And you can also left click hold and then drag a box around the points you want to add. If you hold Control while you drag the box, then it will add to the selection, even if the points are outside. So if you hold Control down while you're dragging the box, it's going to add everything in the box to the current selection rather than making a new selection. The next tool is Draw Selection. So with Draw Selection, as long as you're left clicking and holding down, any point you cross over is going to be added to your current selection. So you don't need to left click on each one manually, you just need to kind of draw over them. And of course, if you want it to be added to the selection rather than a new selection, hold Control down. And that'll get you the result. And then your initial points that you had selected won't be let go. Then we have the Pin Depin tool, which we've already talked about. So if you use this and then select on a point, it'll reset it to its original location. It also removes the pin status from any points which you manually set to a location. So that'll make it so that it will be affected by the nearby pinned points once again. Okay, the next tool we have is pull points. So when you're in this mode, it's going to pull all of the points that are nearby to wherever you click inwards towards the point. You can kind of think of it like a black hole in a sense. So if I left click here, all of the nearby points are going to be pulled in. You can see that any point that does get adjusted is going to become a pin by itself. So that's going to mean that if you go back to using Selection Tool and you drag points around manually like this, that they're still pinned, so they're not going to move. But when you're using the Pull Points tool, it will still move those pinned points, regardless of the fact that they're pinned. Very similarly, Push Points does exactly the opposite. When you click somewhere, it pushes all nearby points away from the location. Okay, so let's go ahead and reset all of the points for a second. So I'm going to go back to the Selection tool, and I'm going to left click on a point. So our next tool is Increase Falloff / Smooth Selection. So right now we have a single point selected. If I hit the plus button here, Increase Falloff, you'll see that it selects all of the nearby points. So now if I drag one of these points around, all of them are selected, so they're all going to move in the exact same way. So by selecting all of the points, you can also increase it further than that, meaning that even more points are going to move in exactly the same way. If we let go of everything, well, we did manually move those points, so they're all pins now. So the opposite of using the increase falloff is decrease falloff. So if you want to go back to having only one point selected, you can just hit that until you get back to your original point. And then you're once again back to manually moving one point around, or one point and the nearby connected points. Invert Selection swaps all of the white points that are currently not selected with your currently selected points. So if you click on the center and invert your selection, now every point that's not the very center is affected here. And now you can drag them around. All of them will be affected at the same amount, up to the bounds of the web. So you can see that a point can only go so far to the left, so far to the right, up and down. The next tool, Convert Selected to Pin. Even without moving a point, if you use that tool, it becomes a pin. So if you want it to be in place but not actually adjust it from the original value, that's the tool you want to use. So Select Pin Column is going to take your currently selected pin and then take this strand that goes from the center to the outside and select all of the points along it, minus the outermost and the innermost points. So similar to that is Ring Selection, or Select Pin Ring, which is going to go around in this hexagon and select all of the points that are on the same ring as the currently selected point. So with that, we can drag all of these around with the same amount of movement between each of those points. Okay, the next tool is Select All or Deselect All. So if we select everything, that means we're going to be adjusting every single point with the exact same movement as we go up or down to color shift it. And then reset selection or pins is going to reset everything to the default state for the pins you have selected. So if I pull everything down here and then I hit the reset button, we're back to the initial starting point. Another way to reset everything for this tool would simply be to hit the reset all button. But there may be cases where you only want to reset half of the points, and then that's where the reset selection option becomes useful. Another way of selecting pins is by using a color range. So I can select all of the pins that fall within this red color over here to the right of this green color by selecting with a range. So that's another way you can target some of your colors in order to adjust them. So now selecting based on a color range, I imagine, is even more useful when you're using a high resolution web map like this, where it's hard to see each individual point. But if you were to select a range like this, then you can easily select what you want to without accidentally clicking on some of those other points. You also notice down here a tool for auto lock. So when you have auto lock selected and, well, let's go ahead and left click here. So when you have auto lock selected and then you try to move a point, what will happen is that it will automatically pin the nearby points so that they don't move as you move this currently selected point. So you can see that auto lock is set to 1 point initially. That means that the pins that are 1 point away from it, or one node along the column, are going to be locked. But if we change to 2 points, and we click here, and now the ones that are being locked are 2 node points away, but the nodes that are 1 point away are still going to be affected by the movement of this selected point. So this would keep going. With 3 points, there would be 3 points away, so on and so forth. So now would actually be a decent time to switch over to the Chroma Luminance grids, because when it comes to the auto lock, there's a couple extra options here. So on the color warper grids, when you have auto lock enabled, the points that are 1 away are still going to be auto locked when you have it set to 1 point. Likewise, if you set it to 2 points, then you need to have 2 distance for the lock to take place. But because this is a grid instead of a web, we're affecting points that are left, right, up, and down whenever we move one of these points. So if I turn off auto lock, you can see here that we're warping the color grid on multiple axes at once. So because of that, we can have our auto lock set into columns mode, which when we have it in 1 point is going to lock the columns, which is top to bottom on the left and right sides here. So if I drag this, you can see that the points locked are now here and here rather than up and down. And then rows mode, we've already shown that. Rows go left to right. So it's locking the rows that are right above and right below. And then the last option is to auto pin the points surrounding the point, which in this case means all 4 directions. So if we click on a point and move it, you can see that it locks above, below, left, and right at the same time. And if we set it to 2 points and hit Control Z undo a couple times, then it would be the same as before, but the points that we're locking are 2 points away rather than 1. So it would still affect the points that are immediately surrounding the selected points, but no further than that because of the 2-point auto lock. Then finally, at the very bottom here, you can see the adjustment to Chroma and Luminance for each of the points we've made. So you can also adjust them not by dragging them around the grid, but by left-clicking, holding, and dragging along this scale. So we control Chroma by moving to the left and right. That's the color of the selected point. And then Luminance, how bright the selected point should be, going up for a brighter luminance or down towards 0 for darker colors. Back on the hue saturation web, we can see, similarly, we can drag hue, saturation, and luminance for each of the points. So if you want to adjust the hue of a point, you can drag along here. Now note that adjusting just the hue is not a straight line between the 2 points. So if you wanted to adjust specifically hue, then this might be an advantage here using the sliding scale rather than dragging it around the grid manually. Saturation, very similar, bringing it towards the outer edge for more saturated colors or towards the center for less saturated colors. And then the luminance option actually isn't affecting the grid directly, but affects the brightness at a certain point. So if we take a point and we adjust the luminance value, you'll see that it doesn't actually slide along the web at all. So changing the luminance value for each of these points is a process that you can only really set up over here if you're using the web tool. So we can see that if I just select all the points and I drop the luminance down, you'll see that it becomes darker for every color in the clip. Or if I increase the luminance towards 1, then everything brightens up. And of course you can do that on a point-by-point option. So that's going to be about it for taking a look at the new color warper tools inside of DaVinci Resolve 17. I've been Chris. I hope you guys learned something from this video. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys in my future video content.